Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Getz with another edition of our podcast series. Today, we're lucky enough to have two guests. We have Becky Cole and Bill Thomson, both with DC Blox data centers. And they're going to talk a little bit about what's different in their type of data centers, why they're building in kind of second and third tier cities, which in this podcast, we talk a lot about the different careers for folks in data centers. And I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of those careers are literally in your hometown. And as we build out more edge compute and we start working on autonomy, that's just going to get to be more and more the case. So first off, Becky, Bill, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us, Carrie. Great to be here.
Yeah. So Bill, tell us a little bit about DC Blox and why you guys are different and sort of what prompted you to build in these smaller cities.
Yeah. So DC Blox is a multi-tenant data center operator, and we are specifically focused on these tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And the reason is a lot of the major data center companies today are building in what we might call the NFL cities. And there's plenty of business and opportunity, and they're making plenty of money there. But it turns out the only reason they're not building in the smaller cities is because the markets are smaller and they're quite frankly have enough demand where they are. So DC Blox has looked at these cities. The business needs in those markets are no different than the major cities. It's just that they've been overlooked and underserved. So we are building smaller scale data centers to meet the size of the market. We're getting a lot of investment, and we're building in these markets where the need exists and they have just been underserved. There's also a big trend for companies to get out of the computer rooms of the data centers they've built previously. And so that means they're moving to the cloud and they're moving to multi-tenant data centers like DC Blox. And we're trying to build where the market is growing.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about what you do at DC Blox.
So I am Vice President of Marketing and Product Management. And I came to DC Blox from the technology industry. So I have an undergraduate degree in computer science, and I spent the first dozen years of my career or so as a programmer. And then I got into marketing and product management, mostly for technology companies. So I was responsible for selling into, software and cloud services into mostly enterprise and SMB business and markets. And data centers, interestingly, didn't really have a history of being technology companies per se. They were more specialized real estate. They were a special building built to house computer equipment, but largely it was just a specialized building with fancy equipment to keep that equipment running. Nowadays, because IT is becoming so complex and everything is becoming digitized and IT infrastructure is becoming distributed, meaning companies are moving workloads and applications to the cloud. You see mobile devices and applications everywhere moving data around. You see IoT or Internet of Things devices and sensors needing to move data to compute infrastructure for processing. All this whole trend means that IT is getting complex and data has to be moved around, has to be transported by complex communications networks. So part of data centers is providing that rich network connectivity. And it means that the target customers of data centers are more IT strategic executive management. So now we're actually appealing to CIOs and chief technology officers, and data centers can help them meet their strategic IT goals, which is very different than talking to a facility manager or a CFO about the best real estate investment to make.
Well, and that brings up another really good point about some of the smaller tier cities. There's a lot of companies that don't want their compute halfway across the U.S. They want it close to where they have staff and they have people. And right now we have a lot of aging out infrastructure, the chiller plants and the UPSs and generators that are about to be retired. And so it's certainly, there's a shift, obviously, not having to replace all that capital.
Yeah, that's a great point. As you indicate, a lot of companies are trying to get out of their own facilities. It's very expensive to build and very expensive to maintain. And their only options, if they're going to do that, is to right now, drive to the nearest NFL city to be able to have a secure, reliable data center, built to state of the art standards. Now, when we're building these data centers in these secondary markets, they can stay local, and data centers are a locale business because you need to actually install your computer equipment in that data center. You need to visit the data center to manage and upgrade it. So, yeah, being local is a big deal, and the markets, at least that we've built our data centers in, have been very responsive to that.
Sure. And I think COVID definitely highlighted that. There's a lot of people that had outages and couldn't get on a plane to go fix them. So there is a good portion of folks that like to keep it close. And I think with autonomy and some of the other things that are coming, and you mentioned IoT, which I think is the worst acronym ever in this industry, but with IoT, there's no reason for a lot of that data to have to go so far when it could be processed locally and dealt with locally, because it's probably not stored anyway. It's just something for communication.
Yeah, it's a great point. We are seeing plenty of demand for what we might just call traditional IT services for our data centers. But when most people talk about data centers in edge markets, they talk about 5G and that need for local compute. And that's a real trend, and we're happy to be on the forefront of that. But there's plenty of just regular data center business to be had long before those future architectures come into being.
Sure. Well, some would argue that 5G is not the end all be all they expect it to be. 5G is the next best thing until 6G comes along, and then it'll be 6G. So it's definitely getting a lot of hype right now, but certainly is a long way from being everywhere. Let's move to Miss Becky here for a little bit. Becky, tell us a little bit about what you do there and kind of how you got into the data center industry.
Yes, certainly. So DC Blox, I currently cover actually several areas, and it's kind of, you'll see based on my background where that comes into play. So I cover several areas of marketing, along with sales enablement, community involvement, which is a passion of mine, and then some employee engagement activities as well. I certainly did not go to college thinking, I want to be in data centers, right? It wasn't really a word or something that we really knew about when I went to school. Because as you stated, a lot of companies had, they had their computer rooms or their server rooms. So it wasn't a course or an option that was even offered. I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta with the intention initially of becoming a corporate and entertainment attorney, if you can believe that.
Wow, that's a tad ways off.
Yeah. Quite a bit. I ended up deciding about my senior year that I did not actually want to pursue a degree in law. And luckily, I had majored in business management and also got a certificate in focus in marketing. Tech is also where I picked up kind of my love and excitement for technology. Even though it's mostly known as an engineering school, they're on the forefront of a lot of research when it comes to new and cool technologies and things that people would use in their IT departments. So that became kind of exciting for me. Post-tech, I was in sales for about 8 years and primarily focused in IT staffing. So I got to continue to kind of build on my IT knowledge and really garner that passion for technology. I started getting involved in volunteering with technology-focused nonprofits and started attending a ton of networking events that were, driven by technology organizations. So they're a great place to learn about industry insights, new and cool things that are coming from, some of the big hyperscale companies and even some of the latest IT trends. So I was able to use that in a lot of the conversations I was having with some of the C-level executives that I was working with at my clients. And then a big portion of IT staffing, if you can believe it, because you wouldn't think of it, but is project and program management. I mean, every company you work with, right? All of the job orders you get, or if you've got a big project that you're working on, it takes a lot to kind of manage not only the hiring manager, but the recruiters, the candidates, and then making sure that everybody's getting their stuff in on time and checking in regularly. So I kind of built up some really good project management skills because of that position. And then I coincidentally was one of my clients happened to be a data center REIT. And they were looking for a project manager for one of their product teams. And I actually put my own resume forward and was able to relate the skills that I had from being in, sales for staffing to the job that they needed. So even though I didn't have previous data center experience, I knew enough about the industry because, one, them being my client, but also going to all these networking events to learn more, and then was able to apply the skills that I had in order to get that job. And then from there, have moved to DC Blox. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's one of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast. I know that I'm one, and there's several veterans outreach officers from the infrastructure masons into the data center industry. And just like you're talking about, people that have good military background, they're very acclimated to doing things procedurally, and step two follows step one, that kind of thing. And they make really good project managers. And they also do a lot of outreach to not just the veterans, but the spouses of the veterans, which is one of the things that I think is so cool about them, because the same thing, women that have moved around a lot and handled things at home when their husbands are deployed, or vice versa, men that have done the same thing when their wives are deployed, have a lot of those parallel skills. And I think in order to solve a lot of these skill shortages in the industry, it's really going to be more about skills-based hiring than it is going to be the degree. I have a hashtag, hire the person, not the paper, because a lot of people that start in this industry, just like you, have degrees in something that has literally nothing to do with data centers. And most of the people my age, data centers weren't a thing. We had computer rooms, and enterprise companies had their own data centers, and I ran a few of those myself, but it wasn't an industry until this co-location market came along, and it definitely has changed. But to you guys' point, being out in a tier 3 city somewhere, or tier 4 city, or somewhere that's not one of the traditional data center markets, there's definitely a skill shortage. And I think looking at those parallel skills is important. Don't you think?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. It helped that I came from the staffing world, so I was able to, correlate and relate skills that I had in my background in order to get the job that I was applying for at that data center REIT. And then because of my sales and marketing background, I then moved into a product manager role where I focused a lot on product marketing, sales enablement, deal pursuits, things of that nature. So it's really helpful if somebody can find a local recruiting agency, or a friend that maybe has been in recruiting, that can really help them kind of map that out, right? Because a lot of companies don't see, they're just looking for specific titles or specific buzzwords in your resume, and they might not actually be able to kind of see through the noise to really pick up, well, you really do have all of these skills. Just because you haven't worked in that industry before, you would still be a great asset to their team.
Sure. And I think it's going to take HR really changing the way that they recruit. And some of the bigger companies do it exceptionally well, where they have people that'll go through a resume and figure out parallel skills. Google's a good example. Their safety person came from mining, which is a good parallel industry. But to your point, a lot of these HR people don't understand what those parallel skills are. And they probably are overlooking some really great candidates.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So a REIT, for those that are listening that don't know what that is, that's a real estate investment trust. And there's quite a few of those out there that are kind of the landholders for multiple data center footprints. And in order to get in one of those data centers, you either get in there through a broker, you get in there from one of their direct salespeople, or some combination thereof. But talk to me a little bit about how you see the cycle from somebody deciding that they want to go into a data center space. How do you get end users if you're trying to fill up your data center space? Talk a little bit about, for people that are thinking about a career in sales and marketing in this industry, let's talk a little bit about the customer acquisition process and how you go about identifying potential tenants and how you work with them through the process.
Yeah, so there are a lot of skills that are transferable from other industries in terms of sales and marketing. When we get ready to build a data center in a new market, the first thing we need to do is bring awareness that DC Blox or any data center is coming. And so there's a lot of digital marketing involved in doing that. We'll send banner ads. We'll do, standard, direct mailers. We'll send out email campaigns. We'll start social media engagement, and we'll actually select companies within these target markets that where we're going to build to engage with and to communicate with in order to let them know that a data center is coming. So a lot of the digital marketing skills that folks might be using in other industries are directly applicable to this initial approach. We do a lot of field marketing in the markets where we sell our data centers. As we've indicated, it's a very local business, so we want to be involved in local technology events. We want to invite people to our data centers for lunch and learns, and that field marketing skill and expertise is again transferable from other industries. We have multiple sales channels that we leverage, so we do have direct sales, and if it's probably helpful to have data center industry experience directly, but if you're from telecommunications or if you're selling commercial real estate, you're halfway there. A lot of our sales reps come from what we'll call adjacent industries, not directly from the data center industry itself. We also sell through partners, so resellers and managed service providers who are providing IT services and might need a data center partner on the back end. And so if you're working for any of these IT service organizations, that might be also a connection to data centers. And then, aside from direct and partners, as you mentioned, there's the broker channel, which tends to be more real estate focused. So if you have any experience in commercial real estate, there's also a close connection with how data centers sell and fill their facilities.
Sure. And Becky, you talked a little bit earlier about community outreach and how important that is to you. So tell me some of the kind of things that you do from a community outreach standpoint.
Certainly. So I have been volunteering since, it's been well over a decade. And I really kind of found my passion for community outreach and community involvement, I'd say, when I was in college. Started doing a lot of work with the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, as well as Habitat for Humanity. Once I got into sales and started to see more and more, what technology could really do to help drive companies, and especially nonprofits that might not have the financial status to have all of the tools and technologies in place that they need to run like a normal functioning business. And if they had that, how much, more could they produce, or how much more could they help their communities? And then which then of course leads you to find out that there's a massive digital divide in our markets and across the country for sure. I know you've been on one of the networking calls when I talked about kind of that problem in where, now all these children are trying, they're trying to do their schoolwork from home, and they might not have a device in their house. And so they're falling behind in school. Libraries aren't open for them to go to. The rec centers, most of them are not open for them to go to either. And so that can be, it can really hurt their morale and like their ambitions for what they thought that they were going to do, what their big dreams were per se, which it then leads to, dropouts. It leads to, them being held back because they can't stay up to the same level as the rest of their classmates that have computers in their home. So that has become a big driver for me personally over the last several years. And I have also kind of brought that into DC Blox. So our mission around community involvement is education. So whether that is helping the children get the tools that they need, or the training that they need, tutoring that they need, or even up to the, adults that might need additional training or technical skills so that they can get a job or get a better job, get a pay raise, things of that nature. Because at the end of the day, if you give people the tools in order to be successful, hopefully you will then alleviate the end result, which is poverty.
Sure. Teach a man to fish, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So you bring up a really good point, though. I also do a lot of educational outreach, and it's kind of sad right now with the way things are, in that a lot of these kids go home with technology and their parents know nothing about it. They don't know how to operate it. They don't know how to make sure their kids are doing it safely. And certainly the devices that are locked down from a school level are a much better option than just here's a tablet of whatever operating system you choose, and having no way to lock it down from a parental controls perspective. But there are a lot of people that need that help just to be able to help their kid with a homework right now.
Yes, indeed. And luckily in Atlanta, at least there is a nonprofit that not only gets the devices into the homes for the children to use, but they also train the parents on how to use them, how to run them, how to kind of quasi troubleshoot. They have some IT support staff on hand as well. So if something goes severely awry with their laptop or their Chromebook or whatever device they've been given, possibly a tablet. I know in Birmingham, they have set up a kind of a bench of volunteer people for IT support so they can call in if they have any issues when they try to set it up. Because, of course, now you're just shipping these devices into homes. They don't even go and pick them up at a nonprofit where they could get some level of basic training. So then they need to get on a support call with somebody to kind of work through how do I even get it going, right, and get it set up so my kids can start using it.
Yeah, and that's so important. Whatever side of the coin you're on about kids going back to school in the fall or not, I know that seems to be the daily debate going on right now. But regardless whether they go back to school or not, kids have started learning in a more digital way. And I think they're going to expect to learn in a more digital way moving forward, which really highlights the need for data centers, and not just in 6 or 8 big city pockets, but in literally every state. There's a need for that. And some of the states have sort of been pushed to the wayside because they're in the pathway of tornadoes or hurricanes hit there once in a while. But we know how to architect for that, and we know how to build around that. So it definitely opens up a lot more opportunities, I think, for data centers in all of those markets to better serve the local communities.
Certainly.
So talk about kind of what's next for you in the industry. Obviously, you love what you do, and you're doing a lot of community outreach. Are you working on any certifications? We've talked a lot about certifications being sort of an equalizer in this industry, and people that come from outside of the industry can go get certified, and it definitely helps. It's a good immersion course because curriculum has not kept up with the industry at all. So what's next for you?
Right. Well, and of course, since I didn't go to school for for being in data centers, I did not pick up any of those certifications while I was in college. But since then, so I obtained a Scrum Master certification, which for those in project or program management, there's, different areas of Agile. So you can get like a PMI certification, which is helpful, but it doesn't really get down into the nitty gritty of what is Agile versus what is Scrum. And then I've also started going through the pragmatic marketing training modules. So they offer various ones that are specific to, building, developing, and launching a product, and, how to get the customer engaged early on. So you're not just like, it's great to have these awesome ideas, but if it's not something that people actually need, or it's not solving a problem that they have, you're probably not going to be, you're not going to have a whole lot of success in selling it. And there's also modules that are more tailored and focused towards, marketing and product marketing, which is kind of more where my current position is.
Awesome. Yeah, there's always a change. And one thing that we've talked about over and over on this series is that if you don't like the job that you're in, all you got to do is look to the left or look to the right. And there's 100 other jobs in and around this industry that you can do. But at least once you have kind of the jargon down and the gist of what data centers do, it's a lot easier to make a little parallel move, and certifications are a great way to get there.
Absolutely.
And so, Bill, tell us what you think probably are the challenges today, maybe in this whole COVID environment. What are you seeing as some things that are different than they were prior to COVID?
Well, clearly, there's a lot more folks who are working from home than we've ever seen before. A lot of businesses obviously are trying to avoid bringing their employees into the office where there might be risks of infection. So more and more people are working from home, and that's changed a lot of the what we would call IT infrastructure or networking, differences. Folks have realized that if you're going to communicate from home, you still need to get connected to your office. So a lot of companies are building VPNs or virtual private networks or secure ways of getting employees connected from their home over their ISP to their office. And then they need communications tools. So conferencing systems, video conferencing has become very, very popular. And it's been a learning process, and it's been a shift in how IT departments and even the internet is being used. But it's amazing how quickly everyone has adapted to that. We see companies who have trained their employees, employees who are using tools they've never used before. And many companies are recognizing that there, in some cases, are even productivity gains from people not having to travel as much and commute as much. And they seem to be connecting and communicating just fine from their homes with these new tools. So we definitely see a shift and a lot more comfort in businesses utilizing that. It'll be interesting to see what happens over time as infection gets taken care of and there's more control and vaccines available. How much the standard business environment stays the same, or how much it actually changes. We're having a lot of discussions within our own company about how that's going to affect our business going forward. And I know for a fact there's a lot of discussions across industries on the same topic.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So if you had to pick some skills that people could really think about, and especially those that are early in the industry, thinking about coming in the industry, that you see a need for most out there in those tier 2 cities, and certainly would apply to any of them, but tier 2, tier 3 cities, the smaller cities definitely have a little bit harder time, I think, with some of these. But what are some of the talent, the skill sets that you really see a shortage of out there?
I'll start, and I'm sure Becky has some comments on this as well. We talked a lot about sales and marketing, and that's a general function that we think can be every business needs, and data center companies are no different there. There are a couple different tracks of skills. One I'd call the technical or operations track. These are the people who actually operate the data center day to day, and that might involve cabling or IT connections and network infrastructure and the like. And I think folks, if they get direct training from a data center company or a data center training company, that's great. But a lot of folks that might work for a telecommunications operator or a cable operator could have very relevant skills that could be applied to a data center as well. Design and engineering, where you're actually designing, engineering, and maintaining core systems in a data center, like power systems and cooling systems, electrical management, HVAC, things like that. That is something that is really important to have in not just building and designing data centers, but also operating data centers. And I think people who have experience in commercial real estate, facilities management, in many cases may have similar experiences as well. Large facilities and buildings, office buildings can have a lot of the same systems in many cases. So the cross training to learn systems within a data center might be minimal as well. So those are a couple of the key tracks that we would like to see when we move into a new market. And we're not alone. When we moved into Alabama, Google had been building a large data center. Facebook was building a large data center in Huntsville as well. And all of us are looking for skilled local people to operate and run our data centers. And quite frankly, it's been difficult. In some cases, we've had to bring people from other markets to fill those jobs. And we would love to hire locally if we could.
Yeah, I wrote a white paper not a white paper, but an article a while ago called "The Great Talent Suck," and basically talking about how those skills are being pulled out of everyday cities into those data center markets by the big hyperscalers, and how hard it is to find those skills in local markets.
Indeed, we agree.
And I think too, we've sort of done a disservice with requiring everybody to have a bachelor's degree. Not everybody needs one. And we've talked about that probably ad nauseum on this podcast. But when we talk about skills-based hiring and where people can get skills, technical schools and different certifications. And I know some manufacturers have certifications for their own products, although I'm kind of a bigger fan of the open certifications. It's not really product specific unless you certainly need one that's product specific, but because sometimes they teach to the exclusion of all others. But I think technical schools definitely need to come back. I think associate's degrees should be valued. When I started in this industry, there was kind of a thing. If somebody had 4 years experience, they were really worth a lot more than somebody that had a college degree and no experience, because they'd been to the school of hard knocks and they've had to sit there and figure stuff out, and they've been thrown in the frying pan a time or two and burnt their heels. So there's a lot to be said for that. And in some of these cases, in some of these smaller markets, they still have community colleges. And I think it's important to be able to reach out to those students and just let them know the depth and breadth of careers that we have. Much like you guys were talking about your community outreach, I think that's a good way that all of us in this industry can really step up and just go talk to the students and let them know. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We have spent some time talking with folks that represent the career colleges and educational institutions in our markets, and other groups responsible for workforce development, usually state or local government organizations as well. Because we've expressed our need for employees. We have offered to help develop programs or work with other companies to help develop programs to enable the right kind of training. So we definitely agree. It's also there's a lot of opportunity for online training. There are companies that are offering data center online courses that obviously you can take anywhere. Some of them are for actual fees, but some of them are for free. Amazingly, there's a good amount of resource out there. If you're ambitious and search it out, you can find good resources that can get you a decent amount of online training for no cost. And of course, if you can make it to any one of the nearby NFL cities, most of the data center training organizations have schedules of classes that folks can sign up for and get over there to get training directly in either technical tracks or management tracks or engineering tracks. There's a lot of good resources out there if you're motivated, even if you don't find them locally.
And to the point that you guys made earlier, a whole lot more of that is virtual now than it used to be. So I get emails all the time for some of those classes that you used to have to travel to that now are teaching them completely remote, which is a golden opportunity, I think, for folks that are really looking for a career. And I will say this, there's always been a few careers when I was growing up that people say, if you have a degree in X, you'll always have a job. So medical was one, technology was certainly one. And people think you have to write code to be in tech, which could be farther from the truth. We've talked about there's a whole bunch of different jobs, from HVAC to cable plant to coding to managing to all that kind of stuff. But being able to really plug into some of those online classes, I think, and just sort of broaden your horizons is not a bad thing. And I'm sort of a firm believer. I know that there's MOOCs out there, which is the massive online open online courses, which is the same as most universities have them. You just don't get credit for them, but you can still do the work. But I like the certification route. One, I think it holds you responsible. Two, I think it gives you something you can put on your resume and say, hey, I have this certification, or I've had about 40 over my career. So, and a lot of it I had to do consulting, but it does show that you have a command of that knowledge. And I think it's good to have that accountability and to have that sort of golden stamp of approval that you went through the curriculum and you passed and you did your due diligence.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. If you come with specific experience, that pays dividends, and will definitely get you interviews for data center companies. But the certifications are great as well. It shows that you're motivated. It gets you to certain technical education levels that companies like DC Blox would be looking for. So we would agree.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Also, the certification programs, they tend to be a lot more tailored, right? So they're very focused around what, whichever classes or courses that you're taking in order to receive that certification. So whereas you go to college, even an associate degree, right, a 2-year college, it's such a broad overview of topics, and you never really get to fully specialize in one area. And as you know, technology changes so quickly. So maybe a little bit less in data centers if you consider them an infrastructure play, but all of the servers, the network, the connectivity, the hardware that goes into the data centers, it's constantly changing. 2 years old and it's pretty much outdated. So if you've got a 4-year degree like mine from some years ago. It's not really anymore, right? And so it's great that you've got a 4-year degree, but how does that really help you right now in today's world and how technology is now?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for experience and trial by fire and having to work things out. And it provides a diversity of thought. And that's another topic that's so important in this industry. There's just not a lot of diversity, whether it be, female, minority, just diversity of thought as a whole. And I think if you require everybody to have the exact same degree, they've all learned the exact same things, and you lose a lot of that diversity. And you lose the guy that did it in a trial by fire that can tell you if you've got this theory that something's going to work. He can say, no, wait a minute. We tried that a couple years ago and this is what went wrong. And then you can catch those problems before they become problems and try to solve those up front. And very much, like the Scrum principles, you have to figure out, bite it in small chunks, figure out what's going to be a minimal viable product that'll, answer the 80-20 rule and then make that work. But it takes a lot of different viewpoints to get to there in a short amount of time, or otherwise you can spin your wheels doing that same module over and over and over and over and impact every other module behind it. And in this industry, that matters whether you're replacing a HVAC unit or you're deploying 12 new servers on a virtual platform or building out a data center. I mean, all of it's very methodical, but I definitely think that the alternate viewpoints are just so critical. So we're getting close to our time here. And so I'm going to ask each of you, if you wanted to leave somebody with some words to leave behind, maybe thoughts moving forward, words of encouragement, what you think would be good places to look and think about getting into this industry, and why the other tier cities, the ignored cities, I guess, for lack of a better term, are so important. What would you say? And Becky, I'll start with you.
So for one, if you're even considering that, data centers might be an option or something that you want to explore more, because a lot of people, I know you've covered it on the podcast, but a lot of people, when they hear the word, they still don't really understand what it means. So if it were me starting out and I was like, oh, that seems like an interesting industry, let me go kind of check out what's out there and what it's about, I would start by attending some of the networking events. They're all virtual now, so they're much easier to attend. You just have to kind of figure out which ones will fit into your schedule. They tend to be free right now as well, or for a very, small fee. So that kind of will let you kind of dip your toe in, gauge what people are talking about, what technologies they might be talking about, what the trends are, and just kind of see if it's something that's interesting to you. Because what you don't want to do is go sign up for one of those certification courses, even if it's free, because I have done some of them before. They tend to be very time consuming. And so you don't want to get 20 hours into online training and then realize this isn't really what I want to do, right? Kind of my going to school thinking I wanted to be an attorney, and 4 years in decide, no, I don't.
Gouge my eyes out with a spoon. Yeah.
Exactly. So kind of try to dip your toes in a little bit, check out what's going on in networking events or certain, IT organizations that can kind of get you connected. There's usually, most people for those IT organizations are volunteers. A lot of them are C-level executives. So you can even reach out and be like, hey, this is something I'm considering. Can I pick your brain a little bit? And most executives are more than happy, especially if they know that it's something that you might be interested in, because in their mind, you might be somebody that they would want to hire down the road.
Yeah, that's a good point. They still say that 85% of jobs are filled through networking anyway. And I think LinkedIn is another really good source. You can search people out that have that certification. I get those every so often where somebody says, I see you have blah, blah certification. Is this worth getting? And what do you think? And then that usually ends up going to turning into kind of a mentor relationship, and that relationship lasts for a while. And then you end up sort of walking this person through their path to the career, which is, I find extremely rewarding. But there's, to your point, a lot of it's virtual now. And so there's a million ways to get to that information. But you should figure out if it's something you think you're going to like first. And you can always buy a book and just kind of thumb through it. Kindle, it's easy. You can get a book instantly these days and thumb through it and see what you think and find out if it's something that interests you. But I think those relationships, those networking relationships are absolutely key. That's certainly important. Bill, what about you?
Well, first I would say if you have any interest in this space of data centers and technology, it's growing. There is definitely a need. The number of data centers that are going to be built across the United States, across the world, is rapidly increasing because of the cloud, because of co-location providers like DC Blox, because every industry is becoming digitized. And that means more computer systems, more need for data centers. So this industry is going to be growing. So if you want to catch a growing industry, and you think you have an interest, then it is worth pursuing. Keep an eye out. Look for opportunities. Continue to look at the papers and releases and talk to your local government to find out who is planning to come to town. Don't be afraid to apply, even if you're in a somewhat adjunct industry. We talked about if you're in telecommunications operations, you probably have a lot of the skills that a data center operator would need. If you're in facilities management, you probably are working on a lot of the systems that data centers have. Don't be afraid to apply, even if you don't think you're a perfect fit, because data center operators are going to need skilled people. They want to hire local. If you are close, then they will provide supplemental training on the job as well as some of the other formal classes. So keep your eyes open, pursue this industry. I think it will grow over time. There are adjunct industries that can prepare you and that can keep you employed until a data center hits your local city. So be encouraged and keep working at it.
I don't think there's a city in the U.S. that doesn't have a data center. It might be enterprise owned, where a company owns their own, but there are data centers literally everywhere. People just don't realize that. And I know colos have gotten a lot of notoriety over the last few years, but there's still a lot of those enterprise data centers out there, and there's still a lot of companies that want to keep that close to home. So those jobs are literally everywhere.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the data center industry is changing. So data centers that were built previously by companies might be expanded and rebuilt, or they might decide that owning and managing a data center is not for them anymore, which is going to cause this big shift that computer equipment still needs to go somewhere. And if it's not in that local company's data center, it's going to be either in co-location or a cloud data center. And those data centers need to be built and managed and operated as well. So there is growth. There are companies out there that can provide good career paths.
Yeah. And there's even enterprise data centers now that are doing some colo on their own. They're leasing out space to other companies. So it is kind of a hodgepodge, but one thing's for sure, the careers here will be forever, for sure. It's just like medical. It's not an industry that's going to go away. Nobody's going to get a job here and then be laid off out of the data center tomorrow without the opportunity to go get another job pretty darn quick.
Agreed.
All right. Well, I want to thank you guys for your time, Becky and Bill. And for those of you that are listening, we look forward to hosting you on another edition of this podcast series. I'll have a link to both of their LinkedIn profiles in the podcast description, and of course, a link to DC Blox if you want to check them out. And thanks again for listening. You guys have a great week. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Becky.